Hey guys, I'm Ryan.
I'm Eric. Welcome to Uinta Garage. Go ahead.
You just keep going.
Oh, we just keep going from
Yeah,
here?
just keep
I
going.
thought that was the thing. Gotcha. Where's the intro music? Well, we've got my 1972 GMC Jimmy here on the lift. We're doing a lot of work getting it prepped for Blazer Bash coming up this year. And about a month out or so at this point. And we're just trying to cram in as much as we can, get this thing ready. Right now, we're working on gears.
Gears are good.
Been running 456 gears in my axles. I've got a 14 bolt full float in the rear and a Dana 60 up front. Detroit in the rear. The front's been open for, 20 years now. All the years.
Ever since I've ever known you.
Yeah. As much fun as that's been, it's time to gear it down and get a locker in there.
So Ryan went out and bought 538 gears and a Spartan front locker for the Dana 60 in the front. And we're going to be showing you guys how to regear a 14 bolt, which is really one of the easiest axles to regear. It's a good one to start on. And then we'll show you how to do the little bit harder one, the Dana 60. We're going to put 538s in replace of his 456s, compensate for the large tires.
Yeah, I originally went to 456s because I had it lifted with 35s, bumped up to 37s, worked all right. Now I'm at 38s, and who knows what the next size will be. But
bigger.
With the bigger tires, everything's worked all right, but it's not been great off-road. There's definitely been some lacking, and I'm hoping that the 538s helps take some of the strain off of the transmission transfer case, makes it just that much more fun to wheel.
So buckle in, we're going to show you how to do gears.
To get this gear job done, first off, you got to have gears. We picked up a couple of sets of gears here from USA Standard. These are for the Dana 60 here, 538s with the teeny little pinion. And we got the thick 538s for the 14 volt.
My pinion is bigger than Ryan's pinion.
To make sure that we get these in right, we got master install kits for both front and rear gears. We got the Dana 60 with new seals, new bearings all around. Same with the 14 bolt. Comes with everything that you should need.
We also got this is a crush sleeve eliminator for the 14 bolt. 14 bolt uses a crush sleeve. This replaces the crush sleeve with a solid spacer and shims. The crush sleeve sets the preload in between the inner and the outer pinion bearing. It's a pretty important measurement. Oh, we've got our Spartan locker here for the front end too. It's a lunchbox locker. Means it goes inside the stock carrier. They call them a lunchbox locker because you can typically install them in about 30 minutes to an hour. So you can do it on your lunch break.
Not that it matters, but I'm pretty sure this is the one that's making all the noise. Let's see.
Oh yeah. That should be a good nail.
Yeah?
Feel the transition on the bottom. Ryan was polishing his gears.
That's what we're
You did, yeah.
How's that what you're doing? Wow. Look, you never broke any of those.
So guys, we're here, we're working on the 14 bolt rear end. So I have a clamshell puller. If you're gonna do more than one set of gears, even if you're doing one set of gears, these clamshell pullers are worth it. The purpose of the clamshell puller is to pull the bearing off without damaging the bearing at all. And we're pulling carrier bearings off of the 14 bolt. So you have to have the race. So you put the race on, you put your little adapter tube in here, and it's got several different steps, so it fits several different things. You want that to be screwed down to the bottom right there, so it's pressing up against there. And then you want to make sure that this is seated flat on that. And you have several different sizes of these. You just need to find the right size. And how you do that, see if you look at that, there's one lip on that side, there's one lip on that side. You pretty much just put it on. See, that doesn't fit around there. So flipping this one around, it fits on there nice. And you want this top piece right here, you want that to be, you can see right there how that's tapered and it sits right in there. So you want this to come on there, and you don't want to be able to pull that off. So you pull the bearing. Put that on there just to hold your two clamshells together. I just hand tighten it. It really doesn't need to be tightened all the way. Then you take this, pull it down, take your impact, and you go. Sometimes you might need a new battery. Comes off like that. Loosen that up. And you've pulled the carrier bearing with no damage whatsoever. So if you're just replacing something and you're using your old bearings, the clamshell puller is really advantageous. In this bearing, there's rough spots, you can hear a little bit of extra noise there. This bearing definitely needed replaced. So in a 14 bolt, if you have a Detroit locker in a 14 bolt, or if you're installing a Detroit locker in a 14 bolt, this one already has one in it. There's a spring inside of the Detroit locker. You can kind of see it through the carrier right here. So a Detroit locker for a 14 bolt is not a carrier replacement. It does not replace the whole carrier. You actually use the factory carrier from the 14 bolt when you're putting a Detroit locker in a 14 bolt. So it has spring.
What axle is this?
This is a 14 bolt. I'm not sure if you know this, but we're doing a 14 bolt and it's a Detroit for a 14 bolt. So you need something to hold the tension of this spring. So we just this isn't actually all thread. We found a U-bolt and we straightened it out because you might as well use what you have. Stick it through there, washers on either end. It just needs to hold together because these bolts hold the two halves of the carrier together. And so we undo these bolts, the spring inside the Detroit will force these apart. And so you just put this in there so it doesn't force them apart. It makes your life much, much easier.
What happens if you don't do it?
The bolts will go, this last bolt, it's only the last bolt. The last bolt, you'll be taking it apart and you won't realize it. And this will come off and it will break your jaw and kill you to death. And this bolt will go to probably somewhere you'll never find it. And so you'll have to go buy a new bolt and that will suck. Ring gear. Polished ring gear. So you can see that spring right inside there. That's the main spring for a Detroit. I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's why we have these right here, because right here, these two halves will pop apart. That spring has quite a bit of tension in it. One thing that you do need to check when you take your ring gear off, and this does not happen very often, but you can see I have a flat file in hand and it needs to be a pretty fine file. On this carrier, there are a couple of burrs that stick up, especially right here, that are sticking up. And so you just take that flat file just to make sure that the ring gear, you can kind of see a couple of bright spots right there. You just want to make sure that the ring gear sits 100% flat. And then I like to do that on the new ring gear. You just take that file again and just run that file across really, really lightly, just to make sure that everything sits flat and flush. You put ring gear bolts in, even if it has a lock washer, I like to put a little red Loctite on them just for insurance. You do not want these coming loose.
Now we've got the 14 bolt carrier set up with the 538 gears. Everything is torqued down and ready to go in. Got to get the bearings on. We wanted to talk a little bit about gear choice and selection and kind of why we went the way we did. Originally when I was building my truck, I was running 35-inch tires, had a 6-inch lift, and was pretty happy, but needed just a little bit more gear. So I went from a 410 to a 456, and that was great. I then jumped up to a 37-inch tire, which still worked fine, but I could tell that everything, the powertrain was just working a little bit harder. So it was like that for a few years. I've driven it to Moab from Salt Lake. It's about a 4-hour drive, and on the highway, it does great. But definitely had room to grow. I have a 700R4 transmission, which has a deep overdrive, and that actually allows for a lot more gearing to be added. So I actually hopped online, knew how the truck was driving, and started playing with one of the calculators. I actually went to Grim Jeeper and put in all my information, figured out what gear range would get me into the best RPM with the tire size that I have now, and maybe a step up in the future. That's how I settled on the 538s. Using the calculator, I'm gonna be at about 2,400 RPM, running 70 miles an hour in overdrive, which pretty good considering a pretty built wheeler on large tires, being able to do freeway speeds. So I'm pretty happy and looking forward to this. Another big reason that all of this had to happen, these gears got messed up in a wheeling trip where I was a little throttle happy, and there may have been a few feet of air underneath the truck. In the landing, it messed up the gear mesh. Things got compressed a little bit, and they started making a lot of noise. There's a lot of polishing that took place. You can see how shiny the gears are. And that ended up making all the bearings start making noise. The gears, I'm sure, were getting really hot, and I heard quite the howl anytime I drove over 35 miles an hour. So I'm looking forward to the new quiet experience that this will be. One thing we want to point out, just in strength-wise, like you can't really see a difference between the thick 456s and the thick 538s. They look almost the same. The biggest difference that you'll see is in the pinions. Specifically 456 versus 538. Just a difference in size. Not too much difference in strength, but it does add into it overall. These will be just slightly weaker, but for the gearing advantage that I'm gonna get, it's well worth it.
So another thing we're doing with this 14 bolt, these are crush sleeves. You can see there's a difference. This is the one that came out of it. This is the one that would normally go into it. You put these in between the upper and lower pinion bearing, and that sets the pinion preload amount. It's a measurement done in inch pound. So you can see there's a substantial difference. I hate crushing these because I don't have a tremendously expensive snap-on impact that will crush them. And so you have to do it with a 47-foot breaker bar and my 300 pounds bouncing on and off of it. So instead of doing that, we got a solid spacer for the 14 bolt. Solid spacer just goes on right there where the crush sleeve goes, and then you have shim, and that's how you set the pinion bearing preload with a solid spacer. This is a much more reliable system. There's no way it can crush anymore. You can see that's got a little piece in it that allows it to crush. This solid spacer, shims on top of it, will never fail. And we did that just for a little bit of reliability. This is super cheap insurance to make sure that your gears are fine. So one of the important tools that you need to have, because you're gonna be driving races in and you don't want to damage anything, is brass punches. A brass hammer will help. Sometimes you have to hit the pinion a little bit to get it in place. So these are consumables. Just figure out which one you need. And I use them on all the old stuff too, because you never know. These bearings are, well, actually these bearings aren't very good, but this is the pinion support for the rear axle. Brings the race out, flip it over, It's all the way at the bottom. We need to. Ow! So the reason you use brass punches is because brass is softer than the steel that the races and bearings are made out of. And so if you use a normal punch, you can damage the race. And I've just gotten in the habit of using the brass punch everywhere instead of switching back and forth, so you don't accidentally pick up a steel punch when you're using your new bearings. The other thing that you oftentimes use that you will need is a race and seal driver kit. It's got just a bunch of different sizes, and I was actually using this one. This is from Harbor Freight. It's super cheap and extremely useful. So we're working on setting up the pinion spacer right here. So this is how the pinion spacer, you can see it's got a little lip right there. It only goes one way on it. And we started out with this shim, I don't remember, 030 I believe. And it was too tight, so you actually add a shim to loosen it up a little bit. Put this sucker back on, put the yoke back on, press it all together, and then we'll remeasure it. So this is our 14 bolt pinion support. This is the greatest thing about the 14 bolt. So you have this pinion support. If you're using a crush sleeve, you put the lower and the upper pinion bearing in, you crush the crush sleeve. You do not put the seal in until you have the pinion bearing preload set. We measured the pinion bearing preload with this. You cannot use a clicker style torque wrench to measure the pinion bearing preload. You're actually measuring rotational force. So you actually have to put this on and put the yoke on, put the nut on, get everything tightened down, and then you have to rotate it. If you don't have one of these at bicycle shops, very often you can get them on Amazon. The old school beam bender torque wrenches, the ones with a scale that goes across right here, and it's got a little not a dial on it, just a scale that when you roll the torque wrench around, it will read rolling torque too. You cannot use the click style torque wrench because that reads a final torque. It does not read a rolling torque, and a rolling torque reading is what you need. So we use these shims and that solid spacer in this to set the preload. Our preload, the spec on this is 25 to 35 inch-pounds for brand new bearings. We are at 27.5 inch-pounds. And now we put the seal in. This will assemble. So this whole thing, we haven't even run one setup on the gears, and we'll assemble this whole thing. The shims to set pinion depth go right here. So this gets assembled completely, and then you can pull this whole piece in and out as you're setting up pinion depth. It's one of the things that makes the 14 bolt super easy to set up. So we're gonna throw this in here, we're gonna put the yoke on, we're gonna Loctite it. Another thing that you need to know is until you are done to your final thing, use the old pinion nut on it. All of these have a washer. It's a very thick washer. So we have been using our old pinion nut, and we will get our new pinion nut, and we will Loctite the new pinion nut on after we torque it to, 14 bolts are a ridiculous amount, 195 or something like that. Pretty much as tight as you can reasonably get it. That's about the correct torque spec. So we're gonna throw this seal in and keep on setting up. It's good. It'll stay in. We've got our pinion preload set. Backlash is in the ballpark. Backlash is super easy on a 14 bolt because all you do is run those adjusters in. There's adjusters on both sides. So now you come time to paint the teeth, and this tells you where your pinion depth is. Now you need to clean off your new ring gear because they always come with shipping junk, and so you got to clean it off. I thin my paint out with just a little bit of gear oil. You kind of get a feel for how much you're going to thin your paint. Paint just a couple of teeth. This is our first one. You want to come and roll this around, Ryan? I'm putting preload on this while Ryan is spinning it around with a drill, and this gives you actually a really, really good, clear gear pattern. As you can spin it around, you can kind of look at it, and it looks like the pinion isn't deep enough. Let's go the other way now, Ryan. I'm pressing actually pretty hard against this. Okay, stop. So if you look here at the pattern right here, you can see that we're fairly in the middle of the tooth. But if you look at this side over here, you can see we've got kind of a straighter line up on top. Now, if you look at the drive side over here, we're fairly centered up. We're gonna open up the backlash a little bit more to move it out. So this pattern is actually really, really close. It needs probably a 4,000 shim adjustment. And so we're gonna pop it out one more time and get a better pattern. So we ran that first gear pattern and we took, I think, 5 or 6 thousandths. And when I run a gear pattern, I just get the backlash close, but I've done a lot of gears in my life. And so you kind of get a feel for the backlash. And this is how you check backlash. So you hold the pinion gear right here and you take the tooth and you just wiggle it back and forth. You do not want the pinion gear to move at all. And honestly, if you have your pinion bearing preload set correctly, it shouldn't. And we've got our dial indicator on here. And if you look at the dial indicator, we are, let me actually zero it for you. So we're gonna loosen it up just a hair because we're right at like 6.5. That's 6 thousandths. And the spec is 6 to 10 on a 14 bolt, I believe. So it's right within just the inside tolerance. So we're gonna run our final gear pattern just to double check and make sure that the shim is correct. And our 14 bolt will be buttoned up. Okay, so I'll go a little bit more. Stop. So you can kind of see, we could run this around a little bit more and the pattern would get a little bit more clear, but it's rounded on top, rounded on bottom. You take it back over here to this side and it's nice and round. It's centered in the tooth. That's what you're looking for, is if you have flat lines top or bottom, like if you've got a knife edge line top or bottom, you need to adjust the shims. You need to move the pinion in or you need to move the pinion out, but we've got nice rounded lines. Everything's in the center of the tooth. This gear set will run quiet and it's gonna run cool. And there's your 14 bolt. Now, we said that the 14 bolt was a super easy setup, and that's these side adjusters is why most backlash is set by putting shims underneath these two bearings. All you do on this is set the backlash with these, and we're actually gonna tighten these up from where they are right now. You tighten each one up an even amount, and it adds some carrier bearing preload, and you actually do need some carrier bearing preload. So we're gonna we've already measured the backlash. It's 6 thousandths, which is right on the bottom end of the spec. We're gonna tighten these up and button it up, and we're done with our 14 bolt. Easiest gear setup you can do. It's a really good axle to start with. There's a lot of information online. You can watch our video. There's actually a lot of videos on this. So watch our video first. And then if we haven't explained it fully, then watch our video again. Then go watch all of our other videos. Then go watch some other videos. But you can do a 14 bolt. A 14 bolt is not a difficult rear end to set up. Thanks for watching.
And it's got teeth.
It's got teeth. It's a locker. It's cool. This is cool. These are cool. These are necessary to be cool. That's all I'm gonna do because I don't want to look like an idiot when I'm doing this because this is really hard to do.